Hello, I am Enrique Barra, and in this video we are going to see how to introduce forms in our React and Redux applications. Usually we will want to have forms and the possibility to introduce data in our application and to interact with it with drop-down, select, and this kind of interactions. For that we will use HTML fields like text area, input, select, and so on. These fields, these HTML tags, will have their own state. Okay? This is how it works in HTML. But in React, we have our own state into the components. And the way to use it instead of the form field state will be to have a control component. There is other possibility, but it's not very recommended, that is to use the HTML state and then from React get it and do it the opposite way. That is an uncontrolled component. But we are going to center into the recommended way to do it, that is control components. You can see more info in that URL there. Well, the React state in control components will be the single source of truth. This is what the React state of the component indicates is the truth. And then from the HTML tag we will get this state just to change its value. Let's see how to do it. Well, with these control components, when the state is mutated, it will have a handler function. This is when the user changes anything into the component. For example, in the input, the user writes another letter, we will call a React function that will modify the state, and via a set state, to modify the state, of course, the application will be re-rendered, and in this re-render, the component will be modified, because this input field, for example, will have as a value the state, the React state. We will see it with an example. And when submitting the form, more or less the same. We will get a React method, another method that we create, and in that method we get the React state and we do whatever we want with it. For example, to dispatch a Redux action. Okay? So, let's see it with an example that is clearer. This will be in the render method, and we have a form with an onSubmit that points to a method that we created. And we have an input field with an onChange that points also to another method. The handle change method, that is this one, in the input field, what does is just a set state, and here we can do whatever we want with what the user wrote. For example, change it to uppercase, or validate that it has several characters, or it has a valid email address, or whatever. So, when something changes into the field, we go to React and do whatever we want. And finally, we do a set state. This is just one line, but it can be several lines, of course. And after this set state, React, what does is a render, because we change the state. And what happens? That this value, look here, points to a state.value that we just changed it. So when the user writes AAA, for example, in the input field, we call handle change, and we set the value to AAA in uppercase. And in the render method, that is immediately called after this set state, the value changes to AAA uppercase, and because it re-renders. And when the user clicks on submit, there is an onSubmit here, and we'll call our other function. In this function, we prevent the default for the form not to submit automatically, and we dispatch a Redux action. New name would be our invented React Redux action. Or, for example, if we don't have Redux, or we have another architecture, we can call a backend service here, or do whatever we want with the state. Okay? So, this is the combination for a control component. We are in total control of what is changing this value, the value of this input. And the same happens if we have a text area or select or on other kind of input fields. All together will be like this: a form in the render and two methods, in this case instead of a Redux action, we just have an alert, just as an example. Don't forget to bind this to these two methods. Okay, so if we have a tic-tac-toe, what we can do is to add an input field to add the player name, and when we get the player name correctly filled and the user clicks on submit, then we show the game. So our component in the render method will show, in the first place, this input field, because value is empty, and when the user fills it and submits, it will show the game. So what are the steps to perform this, or to develop or implement this functionality? Well, in the first place, in React, we have to create this input component, add it into the render to display it, and add these methods that we saw. Then in Redux, we will have to increment the state to add the player name. We will add a new action that will be dispatched from this form in React, and a reducer, because we have a new part of the state to save and to treat and to consider this action. And finally, in React, when something happens in Redux, the state is modified, and React receives these modifications and re-renders, and will show the game because now the player has a name. Okay, so we have 3 steps: React, Redux, and finally React again. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video.